Hello and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel. And my guest today is Alan Heeks. Hello, Alan.
Hi, good to be with you.
It's people who watch my channel regularly will know that I am very keen on gardening. So it will be no surprise to hear that I am speaking to you because of your book called Natural Happiness, in which you draw lessons from gardening to help us develop our spirituality. So, first of all, you are an organic farmer. How did you get into organic farming?
Well, it continues to amuse me, Anna, that I ever got involved with organic farming. If you talked to me 30 years ago, there was no reason to suspect I'd end up doing this. I had quite a successful business career, and I was in a sort of dangerous condition where I was getting burned out and disillusioned with business. And this idea came out of absolutely nowhere, which said you could start an organic farm as a place to help young people find their roots as they try and make sense of adult life. And this went on for probably about 18 months. I thought, well, yeah, that's a good idea, but don't tell me I'm supposed to do anything about it. I had zero experience of farming, young people, education. Um, but I was at a point in my life where I felt like kind of taking a risk, a bit like jumping overboard from a ship and seeing what happens. So I jumped overboard. I literally, left my business career, handed back the company Jaguar, and set up this educational charity. And we bought a 130-acre non-organic farm in Dorset and converted it to a really lovely organic farm with a dairy herd and wheat and a market garden and an orchard and everything else. So that's how I got into it. And one of the jokes about this was there I was trying to set up this education centre for young people, and what I realised after literally a few years of this was that I was one of the people who needed the education. What I learned about organic farming was an incredible lesson in life for me, and that's really what kind of led to the book.
I'm very interested in that you said that a little voice told you. So
Yeah.
tell us more about that little voice. Was it like a vision? Are you aware that you were connected in any way to a spirit guide? Tell us more about that.
Well, uh, yeah, I mean, I find it amazing that I've actually been the initiator of four successful land-based projects, and all of them had a kind of spiritual purpose baked into them. So there's clearly something unusual going on here. And as I try to understand it, I think it's that I am open to hearing guidance that comes from somewhere else. I definitely don't think I dreamed these ideas up myself. I think the ideas come to me, and it's almost like I would say that farm. I mean, the farm was called Magdalene Farm, so there was already a kind of spiritual quality about it, but it was buried. It was called, on the map, it's called Maudlin, Maudlin. And then when we started looking into the history, there was a chapel to Mary Magdalene. We knew where the site was. It was marked on the map. So it's like it was a sacred site, but it was all kind of buried. And I think that actually the land called me rather than, I just chose it. And in terms of the voice, I mean, the real catalyst was going to a place called the Findhorn Foundation, which is, an extraordinary spiritual community in Scotland. And that basically, I went up there for the first time, and I went up with this crazy idea, and I came back thinking, I'm meant to do this. I really am meant to do this. I'm being called to do it. And the other two trustees who I got to set it up with me, one was the chair of trustees at Finton, and the other was a trustee there. So it's like it wasn't just a kind of theoretical thing. I really did want to sort of learn from a successful spiritual community and kind of bring that into a more mainstream form at the farm.
That's interesting because you went to the Findhorn Foundation, but you already had the idea before that. So it's not like you went there and the inspiration came from being there. The inspiration was there before you went and possibly was the reason for your going in the first place.
I think it probably was. I have to say that wasn't conscious. But yeah, in the summer before I went, I was carrying this apparently crazy idea of the farm, and I read this book about Findhorn. I thought I need to go, and Findhorn has been really an inspiration in all the four projects that I set up. There was the third one is a co-housing project, and I went up to Findhorn at New Year with another crazy idea, co-housing, trying to get people interested, and the big insight there was that I didn't just want a co-housing community, I wanted a spiritual co-housing community. So I came back from Findhorn and I rewrote the vision statement. I talked about spirituality and doing it the way Findhorn does. So it wasn't about any one creed or code. I said, it's about shared silence and reverence for nature. And literally within 6 weeks, we got six of us who all shared that vision. And, within 9 months, we'd actually bought a place and moved in, which is all pretty extraordinary. So to me, it says that there's something kind of bigger that was moving through us.
Yes, indeed. And it's the I love that it was Magdalen Farm that you ended up on.
Yeah.
So here we have your journey, and you're inspired. It comes from outside.
Mm.
I guess what I feel listening to you is that what marks you out as different is that you actually did it. Because so many times people are inspired to do something, but
Yeah.
talk themselves out of it.
Mm.
So, what is it with you that meant that actually you went ahead and listened to that, even though nothing in your previous life's experience prepared you for what you were setting out to do?
Well, I think I really am open to spiritual guidance. I meditate a lot, I pray for it, I ask to be guided, and I think I get quite good guidance, partly because I have a track record of acting on it. Probably worth saying that it's not 100% right, and I've had projects that have failed, but to have four that have succeeded, I think is extraordinary. I don't put that down to me. I put it down to, said, being open to guidance. But I think the other thing that's quite funny when you look back is, at times I think, well, my adult life is divided into two completely separate parts. The first kind of, 20 years of a successful business career with a Harvard MBA, etc. And then the next kind of 30 years of kind of doing non-profit creative things that were sort of spiritually inspired. But actually, I think that what I call the cosmic scriptwriter, the divine power that's shaping all this, looked down and thought, this guy's, if I'm interviewing for somebody to start an inspiring spiritual project, actually this guy could be quite useful. All these business skills of making things happen and getting the money together and recruiting a good team. He could transfer all these skills, couldn't he? And sure enough, I did. And I'm much happier applying them in these sorts of projects than I was applying them to make profit for somebody.
And that's the key, isn't it? That we need to understand that we do have skills that could be transferred when we're wanting to make a big life change, but we have to recognize that we are good at things in order to have
Yeah.
the confidence to be able to take that leap, and go forward. So tell us about the actual organic farming process that
Yeah.
you have engaged with. What is it about working with the land in this particular way that is so important to you?
Yeah. I mean, I before I got involved with the organic farm, I was quite into health food. I was eating a vegetarian diet, and I liked the idea of organics, but I didn't really understand the difference between organic and conventional. And coming from a business background where I've been trained to make things happen and take control, the organic farm was a massive shock. I was really fortunate to have a very articulate farm manager, Peter. And one day he kind of just took my arm. He said, "Look, Alan, you need to realize that running an organic farm is like driving a tractor without a steering wheel." He said, "You can't make anything happen." And that really hit me between the eyes because, I'd had 20 years of having to make things happen. And I actually think that the skills that organic farmers use to what I call co-creativity. So the idea that you work with a situation and you work with the characteristics of an organism to steer it in the direction you want. That to me is far more like real life for all of us than this idea of command and control. I mean, most of us hardly control anything. We're lucky we control our own tempers. We don't control much about the situations we're in or the people we're with. So what I started to learn was about the fundamental differences between what you might call chemical or industrial farming, big scale mainstream farming on the one hand and organic on the other. And I had a great guide with Peter. So he said, look, industrial farming is like recipe farming. He said you basically take a field and you make something happen. You can take control and you can impose your will and you can force the growth of the crop with artificial fertilizers. But one of the problems with that is that those fertilizers force the pests and the weeds to grow faster than the crop you want. So it's a bit like drugs. You're hooked into a system where as soon as you start using artificial fertilizers, you then got to use artificial herbicides and pesticides. And what happens is that the vitality in the soil just goes to zero. So your soil is just dead matter that the crops stand up in, but the soil doesn't provide any vitality. And one of the things that Magdalen Farm still does with like the young people who come there for groups, we do what we call the spade test. So we give them each a spade and we take them into one of our fields and get them to dig up a spadeful of earth and look at how many worms there are, and lots. And we have permission to go to the next door farm and do the same. And you can imagine, there's like 2 or 3 worms in a spadeful of earth if you're lucky. And you really don't have to say anything to these kids. They completely get that there is something massively different going on. And then the next stage for me was beginning to believe that there's quite a strong analogy between the way a lot of people get through their lives and chemical farming. I think a lot of people are driving themselves along with caffeine and tight deadlines and stress, and they're suppressing the problems with alcohol, social media, smoking, you name it. And it's a vicious cycle. You keep needing more of it, and you're just pushing the issues away. And one of the other things I think is quite helpful in this analogy is that if you're converting from a conventional farm to an organic farm, you don't just flip a switch. There's what's called a conversion period. So there's a period when you stop using chemicals and things get a bit chaotic for a while until the earth starts to recover its natural vitality and starts to operate as a natural organism. And I think all of this is really a powerful analogy for people. So, I mean, I've now run groups on natural happiness for probably many hundreds of people, and I've seen this approach. I know that it works for people. I see people really turn their lives around, but I do say to them, this isn't some instant fix. This is a systemic change from, something that is unhealthy, that is unsustainable for you, to really knowing how to cultivate your human nature in a way that is good for you and is literally it's like regenerative farming. This is a way of cultivating your own energy so that you're regenerating energy and not depleting yourself.
I really like what you were talking about in terms of the difference between running an organic farm and a conventional, chemically dependent farm, if I can put it
Yeah,
like that.
that's a very good way of putting it. Yeah, exactly.
And bec because it's a difference in attitude about how we engage with life,
Mm. Yeah,
where our will drives everything forward, and we get frustrated when we don't get there fast enough, and that creates a great deal of stress, and so we push harder,
yeah,
and we miss things, we're not seeing things. Whereas if we step back and we say, okay, this is what I would like, how is that going to fit into the larger scheme of things,
yeah,
and have that interaction that nourishes us and guides us, opening ourselves to different experiences, etc., instead of just driving that straight narrow road of expectation to success. There's a lot in life that nourishes us, that isn't going to get us to that definition of success.
Yeah.
So it's that thing about working with nature. I like to let a lot of the plants in my garden self-seed
Yeah.
rather than, you know, I've learned from experience that they prefer to choose where they're going to grow.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. Lovely.
rather than
Yeah.
me rather than me collecting seed and then so I might do a little bit of that, as an insurance policy, but I also leave a lot to just do what they want. And
Yeah.
I've found that works much better. And if we can just be open to that inspiration that comes from life, as you did, perhaps we'd have a lot more fun and a lot less stress and still find that we're flourishing.
Well, I think you've put it beautifully. I mean, in my book, Natural Happiness, the first three chapters are about physical gardening skills like composting and mulching and crop rotation. But then it gets into subtler things like the skills that a gardener uses. So the central chapter of the book is about what I call co-creativity. This is what they call it at Findhorn. Findhorn started out with gardening with the nature spirits, and so the idea of co-creativity is that you're trying to create in harmony with the spirits of the land or the spirits of the situation, and it's very much what you said. I think it's a real change of attitude. So my experience is that a lot of people, sometimes including me, find uncertainty or conflict really stressful. And this is where fight or flight comes in. You either kind of batter the situation into submission quickly, or you back out of it. And co-creative is about a third approach to a tricky situation. It's what I call dancing, or as you said, it's trying to shape the situation, and that requires real patience. You have to live with the tension of uncertainty. It requires a lot of humility and a lot of observation. I mean, not just Peter, but I know quite a lot of organic farmers now, and I'm really in awe of them because they're dealing with really difficult, dealing with the weather, pests, changing markets, climate, you name it, and they have to get a result, but they have to do it, as I said, without control and with a lot of humility and a lot of intelligence, really, a lot of wisdom. Probably a better way of putting it.
Yeah, and throw into that politics too, as something else that they have to contend with, particularly in
Yeah,
our teams. Um,
yeah,
I think the word humility is such an important one because we do behave as human beings. There is this tendency within our nature to be like spoiled children.
yeah,
What we want, and then we want to manipulate nature. We want to manipulate our bodies. We want to manipulate circumstances. We want to manipulate the weather too now,
yeah,
with geoengineering that's going on to create what we want, our vision.
yeah,
And that arrogance has created a heap of pain for us all. So
yeah.
we need to have that humility. But I think the arrogance goes hand in hand with fear because to live with that humility requires trust.
Mm.
And, let's face it, nature isn't always the kindest. We do have earthquakes, we do have volcanoes, we do have droughts, and we do have
Yeah.
floods. Sometimes it feels to us as though we're the ones being battered by nature. So no wonder we would rather take control of the situation. Thank you very much. Is there something that we're missing as human beings when we assume that all of these natural, as we would call them, disasters are really a problem? Or are we missing the point that nature herself has to have cycles as part of a process, do you think?
Well, I think the underlying issue is that most of us are not aware that our attitudes and beliefs are being massively manipulated by mainstream social media. I've just been reading a wonderful book called A Paradise Built in Hell by a woman called Rebecca Solnit, and it's really absolutely fascinating. She's done a very detailed assessment of a whole series of disaster situations like Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans or 9/11 in New York City, and going back historically. And she says, the movies keep telling us that what happens in a disaster is that everybody's fighting each other in the street for the last loaf of bread. She says the reality of what happens in a disaster is completely different from that. It's like 99% of people are actually generous, cooperative, creating a sense of community. And I'm naming that because she says it's extraordinary. It takes a disaster to bring these qualities of real community out. And she says she believes it's because we're living in a society that keeps telling us that the streets aren't safe, that other people aren't safe, that that safety is about staying in your house and buying things. So it's about a massive re-education. And partly what I think is so helpful about organic gardening is that it keeps you grounded in real life. I mean, yes, there are, occasional disasters, droughts, floods, storms, and so on. But I think if you're close enough to nature, you know that that just happens in nature, and that you can get through it, and you can kind of get through it with nature. Whereas, as you said, the historical tendency in our society is think that nature is there to be just used as a dead asset. And, you and I know that nature is a living being full of life and intelligence just as much as humans are.
It's it comes back to trust and learning to work with nature. Just from having my own organic plot, my own allotment plot, actually, is what I meant
Mm.
to say.
Yeah.
Um, every year is different.
Mm.
There is no year that's the same. This year, I've hardly had any plums. Last year, it was a hugely abundant year for my plum trees. Does
Yeah.
that mean that I failed? Well, maybe my plums are taking a rest. They're known to do that from time to time. Um, on,
Absolutely. Yeah.
on the other hand, there was an abundance of strawberries.
Yeah.
So it's, I guess, we need to be a little bit more adaptable in our expectations and work with what's there.
Yeah, and I think you're right about trust. And as I said, I think the issue is that we're in a society that keeps telling us that life, people, situations can't be trusted. The world is dangerous. And actually, if you get down to your local community and your organic allotment, you know that there is a degree of safety. Yeah, things will change, but it's not threatening.
No. So if we've talked about the important lessons that we can gain from looking at life through the filter of an organic gardening experience. What would be your top tip for someone who is looking at making some changes in their lives? Where would you begin?
Yeah, where I would begin is nourishing your roots. So when I'm running a group on natural happiness, this is where I start. And this is in chapter 1 of the book, what I call the tree talk. So if we're able to be with a physical tree, that's great. But if not, you can imagine it. And on my website, which is naturalhappiness.net, you'll find a video recording of me in an apple orchard guiding people through this. But the great thing about that is this idea of imagining that we have roots just as much as a tree does, or a shrub, or a plant, and that the tree gets both nourishment and stability from its roots, and it's a fact that when a tree is under stress, its reaction is to deepen its roots, and I think this is such a simple, powerful analogy. So where I would urge people to start is thinking about your roots. What do your roots mean to you? What gives you stability and nourishment, and how could you get more of that? And the book also gives you some very helpful ways of increasing nourishment. So, for example, chapter 3, which is one of the ones people really like on my groups, is called composting. And the idea of composting is that just as in an organic system, it's the waste that is the main source of fertility and growth in the future. What I say to people is you can do the same. Think about all the energy that's locked up in negative feelings or anxious thoughts that you're just pushing away. And instead of that, there are some ways in which you can face into your difficult feelings and thoughts and compost the energy so you get clean, positive energy for your future growth. So that's part of nourishing your roots. It all kind of fits together very neatly. This is what you do in a garden. You compost to deepen the roots and nourish the roots, and people can do just the same.
So we nourish the roots.
Yeah.
How and that gives us greater stability. How do we flower? How do we fruit?
Okay. So the other part of the tree test, what I ask people to do is go through a process of imagining they're like a tree, imagining the scale of their roots, imagine their trunk, and then imagine their branches. And then I say, now look at whether your roots and your trunk and your branches feel like they're in balance or not. And guess what? Most people feel that actually their root system is not big enough to nourish their branches. And I say, that's fine. And if this was an apple tree in a garden, what the garden would do is one or both of pruning some of the branches and nourishing the roots. And I again, people just find this really helpful because cutting back sounds terrible, but the idea of pruning, a gardener knows that pruning is just a normal natural thing which is for the health of the plant. So one way to flower is actually through some careful pruning so you don't overextend yourself. Another of the analogies I really like is crop rotation. So, you may have this in your allotment, but in our vegetable garden we have a rotation system. We've got 4 beds, and you rotate around. And some crops are more demanding, and some are actually renewing. So I find I literally use this every day. If I've been doing a demanding task, then I don't just push myself into the next one. I say, okay, time for a bit of renewal. I need to go for a walk. I need to phone a friend. I need to have a cup of tea. So that's the second thing about how do you blossom and flower is really aligning yourself with natural cycles. So, don't keep pushing yourself. Make sure you've got a cycle of renewal in between the demanding things that you do. I think the other one I'd put in here, so the later chapters go into sort of how you apply this, you might say. So there's a whole chapter about communities. There's a whole chapter about how you face into the climate crisis. And there's a whole chapter called natural inspiration. And I think all three of those are really important because those are ways that you can flower and that your flowering and your fruit can be a benefit to the greater good, not just to your own well-being. And I think the community one I'd really like to highlight because my sense of where we're all at as humans is that we really are in a time of storms. Things are getting more stormy and more difficult in all kinds of ways for all of us. And I'm basically hopeful in the sense that I think we can weather the storm, but I'm pretty sure that we can't weather the storm as individuals or as little nuclear households carrying on the way we have been. The key to weathering the storm is about local communities. It's about both the physical support of sharing resources and the emotional support of being there for each other when things get really stressful. And there are some lovely analogies between the kind of communities you get in ecosystems, in an organic garden, in an organic farm, and human communities. So again, the model works beautifully that you can look at your organic growth system in nature and say, all right, that's pointing the way for how I sort of grow and flourish in a human community as well.
And coming back to what you were talking about, understanding cycles, I think that there is a further application of that, and that is understanding our own body's cycles and being respectful of the circadian rhythm, for example. One needs to pay attention to getting enough sleep and to, not overstretching ourselves.
Yeah.
Thinking about the lighting that we're using, so that when it's time to be dark, we use soft lighting so that our bodies understand that it's time to go to sleep, etc. So there's so much here that we could all be thinking about in terms of working with our own natures as well as nature around us. And so this is one of the beautiful things about your book is that it helps us to think about our place in nature
Yeah.
and see that we are in fact very interlinked.
Yeah. No, it's beautifully put. I mean, in some ways, I think it would help us humans if we recognize that we are more like other animals than we think. You know, if you've got a pet, you know that that pet needs a comfortable basket, it needs, regular care, exercise, TLC, and it gives you a lot back. And we need to sort of treat ourselves almost like we treat our pets, like really lovingly, but recognize we're animals too. We have those physical needs, as you said.
Exactly. So your book is a wonderful reminder of all of that, and it is called Natural Happiness. I'll be putting a link to it in the description box. And
Okay.
if people want to find you, Alan, how do they do that?
The best way is through my website, which is just naturalhappiness.net. There's a lot of free resources on the website. So things like the tree talk, guide to composting, a lot of things there. So if people are interested in the Natural Happiness book, they can actually check a bit of it out online on the website. I also do a newsletter every couple of months, so people are welcome to sign up for that for free. And there's a contact form. So if anyone would like to contact me, they're very welcome to, and it's all there on naturalhappiness.net.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today.
Been a real pleasure, Anna. Thanks a lot to you.
Thank you. And thank you all for watching. Next time, we're going to be talking about soul purpose. Until then, goodbye.